what really, really helps is to understand the difference between sleep disruption and insomnia. Sleep disruption is kind of an expected impact on sleep that can come from like an innumerable amount of sources. So for example, pain. Insomnia, on the other hand, it has this element of mystery around it. We're chasing sleep. We're trying to understand why we're not sleeping. It doesn't make sense to us. Anybody with pain will have some sleep disruption, and that leads us to kind of like some level of acceptance. But if we still apply the insomnia teachings here, we see that we don't need to chase sleep. Like the more we try to do to achieve sleep, even when we have pain, the more that will just exacerbate things. We will have not only sleep disruption, which is normal and expected, but then we'll have insomnia too. What often causes much more suffering than sleep disruption, it is the insomnia, because insomnia is like an emotional struggle. And when that's gone, things are much, much easier.
Hi, we've got Coach Daniel here today on the podcast. I'm really happy to have him here with us. He's a sleep doctor turned sleep coach, and he's written a fantastic book called Set It and Forget It, which is just a great perspective on how to look at the problem of insomnia. And he's kindly agreed to come and share his wisdom here with us today. So, Coach Daniel, thanks so much for joining us.
Anytime. Super glad to be here, and I hope to share something that can be really helpful for your audience.
Yeah. And so if you're out there listening to this and you're like many people in my audience who maybe got on benzodiazepines or drugs like Ambien for sleep problems, or even things like mirtazapine for anxiety with sleep issues, then I think you're really going to enjoy this. But let's, I have a flow to how I like to do this. So I'm going to kind of start where I usually do and just say, Coach Daniel, tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up getting into this issue of treating insomnia.
Absolutely. It's happy to do so. And I'll actually start at the very beginning, but then fast forward to, I think, what's most relevant. So my dad is a doctor. My mom is a nurse. So, becoming a doctor was kind of very natural for me. I didn't ponder it so much. I went into medicine, actually did my medical school in Sweden, and then eventually made my way to the US because I heard that, medical education is so good here. I became a pediatrician, but I always knew I wanted to subspecialize in something, become kind of niche down. And randomly, a friend of mine just said, "Hey, Daniel, do you know that there's actually a fellowship in sleep medicine?" And that really intrigued me. I always thought, the functions of the brain were really interesting. And I was glad to know that you could apply from pediatrics, which I did. So in 2010, I graduated from a sleep fellowship at the University of Chicago. So that's how I got into sleep. Now, I had learned a lot of fascinating things during my fellowship, but the practical reality of working as a sleep doctor was that you mostly help people with sleep apnea, that snore a lot, stop breathing during their sleep. You prescribe them a CPAP machine, etc., which I liked. But I also had a lot of patients with insomnia, probably, at least as many as with sleep apnea. There were people suffering from insomnia. So I thought this was a really great struggle for people. And I had learned like the basics of cognitive behavioral therapy, which, in the traditional space is considered like the gold line treatment for insomnia. I'd learned kind of the basics of that, which I tried to apply during my years as a sleep medicine attending. And I saw that sometimes it seemed to help people, but, a lot of times patients just disappeared. I didn't really get any follow through and or feedback from them. But still in my mind, I thought that, the problem in the world is that people don't get an access to CBTI. So I decided to just, take it upon myself to start a YouTube channel and kind of mass educate people on cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And that's actually when I truly started understanding insomnia, going back and forth with my YouTube community, like answering comments, etc. And from that point, over the past, I'd say 5 years, I think I've really, really understood insomnia at a level that, not to tout my own horn here, but like few people truly understand sleep, I think. But I think I've gained a lot of understanding for insomnia. And that's, long story short, that's what led me to what I'm doing now, which is like a sleep educator, sleep coach.
One thing, that you call out in the book is that traditional CBTI really falls short in a lot of places. And I don't know probably what the right way is to get to this, but I think maybe you could talk about the main things that you discovered that were wrong with CBTI, and then we can go into kind of how you look at helping people with insomnia now.
Absolutely. So if you look at, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI, it has sort of two components. One is the C, the cognitive component, which is education. And I think much of what people with insomnia are taught actually makes sense. They're taught that most of us don't sleep 8 hours. We actually sleep less than that. 6-7 hours is normal. There's no evidence that insomnia causes any health issues. That part of CBTI can be really, really helpful. But the emphasis with traditional CBTI is very much on the behavioral components. And those are sleep restriction and stimulus control. And the idea is basically that if you've had insomnia, it doesn't really matter why, as long as you sort of stay out of bed really long and you make yourself really, really sleepy, have a really strong sleep drive, that will just overpower any anxiety you have and just make you sleep. And then little by little, you can basically spend more time in bed, and that sleep drive will make you sleep. So that the understanding, or at least the implied understanding in CBT, is that insomnia is basically a lack of sleep drive. You're not sleepy enough. You don't have enough sleep appetite, and you just got to build that appetite to make yourself sleep. And where I saw that becoming a real struggle for people is that they, a lot of people try to like stay up super, super late, get up really early, make themselves sleepy. But the understanding that's missing is that insomnia really is an anxiety problem. What's happening with insomnia is that we're so anxious about sleep that keeps us awake. And even if we are super sleepy and have a really strong sleep drive, it is not going to make us sleep if we're really scared. And that in an essence is what I found was lacking in CBTI.
So CBTI wasn't really helping people with the anxiety surrounding sleep, and that's what it sounds like was the major problem. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the understanding that's missing in CBTI is that insomnia, to me nowadays, it's more helpfully described as almost like a phobia, that we have something happen in our lives. Let's say you're getting married, or you have a big test coming on, or you have a health scare. Any type of stress can happen in our lives, and that makes us sleep a little bit less, which is completely normal, because as part of our brain's like safety mechanism, when we are under some type of there's some stress going on, we're supposed to be a little bit more vigilant, be a little bit more prepared. But then what often happens is when let's say we're a little bit stressed and our brain is kind of looking for threats, scanning for threats, and we're sleeping less, our brain goes like, oh wait, I didn't sleep. This is a problem. And what's happened in that moment is that our brain has like identified not sleeping as a danger or a threat. And what now happens is that because we're afraid of not sleeping, which is the same as saying we're afraid of being awake, we now stay awake because that alarm system is on. And we stay awake, then what we were afraid of has happened. We're awake, which then makes us think that, oh no, what I was so scared of happened. And then we become even more scared of being awake. So to summarize the way I look at it now, I say that insomnia is an ongoing self-perpetuating struggle that comes from the fear of being awake, which is kind of a mouthful, but hopefully we can get into a little bit more of this so it makes more sense for your audience.
Sure, yeah. And so, okay, so, I think, what I know of CBTI and maybe what a lot of others have seen, I often think about, sleep restrictions, things like no screens before bedtime, no coffee, if you wake up in the middle of the night, get out of your bed quickly, go into another room and all of that. What is it that you do that's different from this, that teaches people to address the anxiety component or the phobia component?
Yeah, that's a really nice question. And I would say the following. So when I have a student, a client, a follower, I teach them what I just taught the audience here, that basically insomnia happens when we started being afraid of being awake. And what we often hear in the traditional space is like, okay, you have trouble sleeping, you should avoid coffee, for example. And the intent with that is that, the idea is like, if you avoid coffee, that's going to make you sleep. So in other words, what you're trying to do actually is you're trying to avoid being awake by eliminating coffee from your life. So in the phobia, if you think of this as a phobia where you're afraid of being awake, you're avoiding something to not face what you've been scared of, which actually exacerbates it. Same thing with like somebody takes melatonin, for example, or you take melatonin and they hope that will make them fall asleep. What they're actually trying to do is take melatonin so that they don't stay awake. And that just emphasizes to the brain that, oh, being awake is really scary. It's something we should avoid. So the way I do it differently is basically educating people so that they understand that all these things that they're trying to do or avoid to achieve sleep is actually a big reason why they're not sleeping. And that can lead to this like aha moment when people really see the big picture and they're like, oh my gosh, everything I've been doing or avoiding has actually probably led me to have more struggle. And that can really, really help.
Okay. And, I know in the book you talk about, hey, if you want to pull out your phone because that's enjoyable and you want to, watch your show or jump on Hulu or different things like that, then you should go for it, which is really counter to what I was taught about CBTI. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? What, like, some of these things that seem really counter, like why does that work, and why would that be desirable to have someone, just whip out their phone like before they go to bed or jump on TV or start watching stuff in the, when they wake up? Like what's the thinking behind recommending stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, if we kind of narrow down my thinking around insomnia, it's basically it's a fear of being awake. So what you're describing is what I call befriending wakefulness. Is basically, I say that when we had insomnia, what we want to do is like teach our brain or teach ourselves that being awake is actually not dangerous. It's perfectly safe to be awake. So when we go to bed and we're like, hey, I want to watch some Netflix, and we actually do that, what we're indirectly teaching our brain is that it's okay if I'm awake, it's not dangerous. And when that fear of being awake fades away, then we naturally sleep easier. Now, a very common like follow-up question I get is that when somebody says like, oh, I get it, Daniel, but if I do something that I enjoy when I'm in bed at night, won't that just keep me up? And then I always go like, now you're onto something. You've discovered something. When you ask that question, like, isn't that going to make me stay awake? You've discovered your fear of being awake. Like you've discovered, exactly what is keeping you from sleeping well. So if you're afraid of being awake, there's almost like even more reason to kind of break these rules and do something you enjoy at night. Now that said, some people in my community get the sense that I say that it's very important to do something really fun and throw a party in the middle of the night. No, it's not at all. It's not important to do something engaging or fun. If that comes natural, it's nice, but just resting in bed if you're tired and exhausted is just as helpful. Basically, anything that isn't trying to force sleep is going to be really, really helpful. And I'm just going to sneak one more thing in there, because some people may be like, oh, what's the evidence for this? How can you make these claims? Well, if we look at somebody who is sleeping well, and in your audience, some people will know that one. They'll be like their spouse or friend. And for those who have trouble sleeping, it'll be like the person they're so envious of, right? But if we think about that person and we ask them the following question, they will give us the secret to sleeping well. If we imagine that person we know who sleeps so well and we say like, hey, what do you do to sleep so well? That person will shrug and go, I don't know. And that is the secret. The person who sleeps well exerts no effort. They're not trying whatsoever. So that's just a little bit of like, proof of concept that effortlessness, not trying, is really, really what leads us to sleeping well.
Walk me through how you got there, because I think, this idea could have, I mean, it's not just sleep where I think something like this attitude could be helpful. I also think about it as being helpful with things like chronic pain as well. I guess not letting it engulf your life and consume your thoughts. How did you arrive there? What did you have to see for you to start really realizing that, fighting the insomnia and developing these long checklists of things to do was really making the problem harder, and that we really needed to let go of all of those rules and just, I guess, follow the fundamentals
Yeah, that's a nice question. And it's one of those questions where I wish I could say, like, on March 23rd, 2022, I had this big aha moment and it all came to me. But reality is that it was a multi-year process, really, of, again, really, really engaging with my community on YouTube. That's, I think, where I learned a lot. But if I want to point to one specific thing, it was the following. So whenever I had a patient, actually, even back then, and or a follower or a client or a student who told me, like, hey, Daniel, like, I'm not bothered by insomnia anymore. I'm sleeping well. I'm living my life. I'm all good. Then I would ask, so what do you think helped the most? And the answer I always got, or almost always got, was a version of, I stopped caring so much. And like the fact that almost everyone told me that indicated to me that there is something there. There's some truth there. And what I kind of like, when I started sharing that with the community, that, like, I think, like, when we care less, we sleep easier, that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, because they would say, like, but Daniel, like, doesn't everybody care about sleep? And that is also true. I think we all sleep, and we all want to sleep well, right? So when somebody says, I don't care so much about sleep anymore, it really doesn't mean that they don't care, because all of us want to sleep well and feel well. But what it means is really that they become a little bit what I call less attached to the outcome. When a person goes from, like, oh my gosh, I must sleep, it is of the utmost paramount importance for me, that person will have trouble sleeping. But when a person goes, if I sleep well tonight, that's great. If I don't, that's also okay. Then they become, like, less attached to the outcome. They really found a path to peaceful sleep. But that's, in summary, that's how I kind of started arriving at these conclusions.
It's interesting. I mean, to me, it almost sounds like this form of kind of acceptance. And whenever I say that to myself, I think stages of grief. Rejecting it, bargaining, and then finally coming to acceptance with it. And it is. My thinking is it probably is kind of like a journey for many people to get there, to kind of accept that, sometimes I'm not going to sleep well, and that's okay. I'll still be functional. And I think when you get that acceptance and you take the pressure off, then, it's like you're more likely to sleep. And so I guess my question to you now is, how do you, like, let's say you've got someone who just has chronic insomnia, they've been, maybe because of a stress at very demanding job, all of these stresses, they end up on sleeping pills, and then they turn up and they say, I'm on a really high dose of a medication. I can't go any further. My doctor's saying this is the most it's going to go. Like, how do you walk someone from that position, where they're really convinced they need the medication, to kind of, I guess, this place of acceptance where it's like, I can, I need to just accept that the sleep, that not sleeping is not scary, and that really that's going to be the key, to developing healthy sleep habits, and and hopefully coming off the medication.
Yeah. So as you said, it is. I often describe it as a journey or a path, because that person you describe, they've had a lot of stress. They've been put on, they've probably gone back and forth about many medications, and they've escalating medications. Now they're on a really high dose, but they don't want to take it. And their insomnia journey, which typically involves trying not only medications, but trying, supplements and limiting coffee and a whole bunch of things, unfortunately creates a situation where for this person, it seems like this is a really complex and difficult, like an enigmatic position I'm in. So to go from that place to, like, you know what, I don't need medications, I can sleep easily, there's no pressure. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a process for sure. Now, how does that happen, or how do I help people with that? I think what's what limited me a little bit, or quite a lot, if I'm being completely honest, what was very limiting with being in a traditional setting as a sleep doctor was that I would see a person for like, maybe I had 30 minutes for an initial visit, right? And I try to really, share some meaningful education with that person, but you have very little time. So you tell them a few things, and then you tell them, okay, now I'll see you back in 2 weeks. And between the first visit and the second visit, there was really no interaction. Like, so the person is left completely on their own, which is it's very difficult to help people in that way. And so what I'm doing now is producing both like free content as well as programs that address that by kind of providing people with like bite-sized education. You can start, you start by learning the fundamentals of sleep, then you start understanding insomnia, then you understand, medications, and little by little, when we demystify and we provide somebody with clarity, automatically like their fear starts to fade, and they arrive at a place where they're like not so scared anymore, and they can start coming off their medications. But basically, to answer your question, it is a journey, and I think this like ongoing support, ongoing education during that journey is so helpful.
When I hear it says that, what I hear is, it really can be the power of like that relationship that you form with the person, and that they trust what they're hearing from you, and that it's making sense. And instead of it being, like you said, an enigmatic, complicated problem, it's like, oh my God, there's a journey out of here. There's a guide who can kind of walk me out of this, and that in and of itself would reduce anxiety and stress. I wonder, I don't know if it makes things any more different in how you would kind of go about helping someone. Well, actually, maybe I'll start here just because I don't think we've fully covered this. If you could, and this might be a test for you, what are the fundamentals? If you were to give us like your 60-second version of the fundamentals for maybe an uncomplicated person, not someone on all these medications, they've had insomnia for 6 months and they're just really struggling with it. What are the fundamental things that you would just tell them to get in order?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that there are, like in what we teach, the way we teach, we do have these like two fundamental principles. So I really want to mention that. And really everything I teach can be like traced back to these two principles. And one is the principle of effortlessness, and the other one is the principle of survival. And we've already touched upon the first one. And it basically says that everything we want in life, peaceful mind and peaceful sleep, are effortless. If you think about any time in your life when you felt like, at ease, you were calm, did that happen because you produced that, forced that, or made that happen? It didn't. It was always because of the lack of trying to make it happen. So this peaceful sleep always comes from effortlessness. And we talked about, our friend who said they don't do anything to sleep is kind of proof of concept of that. The other principle is the principle of survival. And it says that, anything that's alive, whether it's a bee or an insect or a human or like a tree, it's designed for survival. If we look at the human body, why do we have nails or eyebrows or anything? Everything can be boiled down to survival. It gives us some type of survival advantage. And really the same thing is true, I believe, for the human brain. It is a survival machine. And so when it is faced with, a tangible threat, like, we're about to be hit by a bus, this is actually, it's designed for this. It immediately makes us really scared, puts us in a fight or flight situation where we jump out of the path of the bus and we survive. And that's fantastic, of course. Now, the tricky thing is that in 2023, there are not that many tangible, physical, actual threats to us humans. So our kind of safety machinery there, it can often get confused. And when it starts treating a perceived threat, like being awake at night, as a real threat, it can be quite complicated. Or not complicated, but we can get into a struggle, I should say. If we start being like, oh no, I'm awake, I have to escape this, then we're reinforcing the idea that there's a threat, and things become more complicated. So, which I've already talked about. So, in essence, I would say like these two principles of effortlessness and survival, they can be really helpful to see. and we understand those, like so many things become demystified. So I would, if I could pick two things, I would definitely pick those two.
Hey, just want to interrupt quickly and just say, if you're enjoying the content that we're producing here, that you consider liking, subscribing, and commenting on the videos. These are the type of things that gets this video kind of pushed to broader audiences, and it can really help us.
You talk a lot about at least in the start of your book, you talk about the brakes and the gas. I thought that was a really easy way to kind of understand kind of the driving forces. Could you share a little bit about the brakes and the gas analogy? Because when I heard that, I felt like Insomnia made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were bringing that up, I was like, oh yeah, that would have actually been a better teaching point to go over. So I'm glad you did. But absolutely. So the gas and brake model, I think, is really helpful because it simplifies things. So when we have had a struggle with insomnia, again, it can seem so complicated, but there are really just two things that I think really matter when it comes to sleeping well. And those are the gas and the brake. So you can think of a car. A car has like a gas pedal that makes it go forward and a brake pedal that stops it. And in reality, the sleep system isn't more complicated than that. There's only one thing that actually can make us humans sleep, and that is our sleep drive or sleep appetite. And in a similar way to hunger, it builds passively, meaning the longer you go without eating, the more hungry you become, right? And it's the same thing with sleep drive. The longer you go being awake, the more sleep drive you have, the more your body wants to sleep. And that sleep drive, again, is the only thing in the universe that can make us humans sleep. But there is, of course, a break in the sleep system too, and that's for safety reasons. And for example, if we're really, really sleepy, but our smoke detector goes off in our house, we don't want to sleep because it's just not safe. So the safety break in our sleep system is what we call hyperarousal, which is this state of heightened vigilance and heightened alertness that we feel when we're anxious, scared, but also when we're excited. When something's going off and our brain thinks, you should pay attention to this, then that can keep us from sleeping. So we have, again, sleep drive is the gas, the thing that makes us sleep, and hyperarousal is the break in our sleep system. So knowing this, one thing that becomes actually very, very clear is that all these things, like how light it is in our bedroom, how much sound there is in our bedroom, like what time we had coffee, if we exercise, and things like that, they don't actually matter because neither of them by themselves have an impact on the gas or the brake. Another thing that's kind of neat is that when we have this gas and brake picture in our mind, we can see that there's sort of like 4 different scenarios that we can find ourselves in as it pertains to sleep. One is a state where let's say we have neither. We have neither sleep drive, or we have any hyperarousal. There's no gas, no brake. And in that scenario, we will be sort of resting if we go to bed in that scenario, because we're not going to fall asleep because our body doesn't want to sleep. There's no sleep drive, but we're also not going to feel particularly excited or agitated because there's no hyperarousal, right? That's, just resting. And then we can have a scenario where we have sleep drive. No, let's save that one for last. We have no sleep drive, let's say, and we have hyperarousal. This is if you go to bed, like, we're not sleepy. If we go to bed super early and we're really anxious, which is going to be very, very unpleasant, we're going to be awake. And then we have the classic insomnia scenario, which is a person with insomnia doesn't sleep much or well, so they do have sleep drive. Their body wants to sleep, but they're also really scared of not sleeping or being awake. So they have this gas and brake phenomenon where it's kind of like driving a car with the brake pushed in. So this person will, they may fall asleep, but then they wake up again, then they stay awake, then they fall asleep briefly. It's kind of very choppy and also unpleasant. That's kind of the classical insomnia scenario. And then we have what we want, which is we have sleep drive, we are sleepy, and we're not hyper aroused, and then we sleep really well. But in essence, this is really all we need to know to understand how sleep works, I think.
Mm-hmm. And so, I'm trying to think about, I'm going to take a segue now over to my community, and a lot of my community is people coming off sedatives. Could you just share your reflections on what it's been like working with people who are coming off sedative medications for sleep and helping them restore sleep? What's that been like for you?
Yeah, I'm happy to share that. And that's very common in our community. Somebody who, wants to come off a sleeping pill, a sedative. And I want to say that I've had, the whole spectrum, like somebody who actually finds that it wasn't that hard to wean off. They expected it to be really difficult, but it didn't turn out to be that way. And the opposite too, somebody who's like, it becomes a real struggle. That is, the struggle is really emphasized by this medication that somebody's conflicted about. They really want to come off of it. They try, they go back on it, and et cetera, et cetera. So I've had like both those experiences.
And from when you were doing this as a physician, how would you usually taper sleeping medications? Like what did you learn about it at the time? And any reflections on that?
That's a great question. I would say in kind of medical school or during sleep fellowship, the education as far as deprescribing was nothing. Like everybody, you taught how to prescribe, but not how to deprescribe. So when I was a sleep physician, I would say I'd just base it patient by patient and do something I felt was reasonable. But I don't remember exactly like how I'd approach it. But with that said, I have some things I was kind of like really excited to discuss with you in terms of like how I approach it now, if that sounds good.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
Okay, very well. I'll jump into it. So now as a coach, I of course never give anybody medical advice. I always tell them, talk to your prescriber. But I have these kind of like three topics or three teachings that I want to always go over with somebody who wants to come off medication. And the first one is this, let's call it the concept of delegation. And so I said earlier that nothing can really make a human sleep except for their own kind of natural sleep drive. But then what often people come back to me with is saying like, but hey, Daniel, like every time I take my Ambien or my Trazodone or whatever it is, I do fall asleep. And points out that there must be evidence there that this actually does make me fall asleep. Well, then I say like, well, this principle of effortlessness, I think is very true. Like when you sleep, it's always because we're no longer trying. So how can we reconcile this? Well, the way I always teach it is that, check this out. When you're taking a medication, whatever it is, two things are happening. One is, yes, a particular chemical substance is, distributed in your body. That is true. But you're also aware of taking it. And that's the second thing that's happening. You're aware of taking a pill. And if you, in that moment, you take the pill, whatever it is, you think, oh, how nice. This will take care of sleep more for me. I don't have to do anything further. Guess what has happened? You have now become effortlessness. You're no longer going to try to sleep because you have delegated the presumed work of sleeping to the pill. And that is the magic. That effortlessness is the magic. So I always teach people that it's not the chemicals, the substances that make you sleep. It is the fact that you have delegated the presumed work. You're no longer trying to sleep. And that makes you sleep. And that also explains these strange phenomena that people can have that like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, which to me is that, well, sometimes you delegate and sometimes you take the pill, but you're not sure it's going to work or not. And then you have trouble sleeping. So this concept of delegation is something I always talk to people about. So before I talk about the other ones, back to you, and I'm curious to hear your thought on this.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me a lot like the placebo effect with a lot of the psychiatric medications, where there definitely is a drug effect. But it's often helped by our expectations about taking a drug and being engaged in treatment and doing something. And so I could definitely see this happening with, taking like a sedative like temazepam or any benzodiazepine, where, I mean, everyone who takes them, they know these things hit the hardest in the first couple of months when you take them, but then it kind of wears off and your body kind of becomes tolerant to it and it's less sedating, but it still seems to work for sleep and sometimes for a very long time. And so I suspect over time, the drug effect is wearing down, but still that placebo or that expectation or the delegation, as you say, is really what's helping people. It's like, yeah, it's taken care of. I've taken my pill. I just going to sit here and wait for it to happen. The other thing I was going to say on that is I've had a lot of luck tapering people from sedatives with in a blinded manner, where I will when I'm removing the medication, I work with a parent or a spouse, and I'll just stop it, and I will have them, if I'm using capsules, they'll take a placebo. If I'm using like liquids, we'll get the suspension syrup, and we'll just keep on dosing them. And then I just tell them 3 months later, by the way, you've been off for the last 3 months, and that seems to help them just go, oh wow, it's been 3 months. I'm well and truly out of the withdrawal window, and I think they can. I think it teaches the lesson at that point that they can sleep without it.
100%, and that's fascinating how you do that. And it's very similar to something we see, or I see a lot, which is that people sometimes just forget. They realize that, oh my gosh, I slept fine, but I forgot to take it, which teaches the same point that it wasn't that the medication that made you sleep. It was all coming from you.
Yeah. We got 2 more points, and I'm eager to hear them. What were the next ones? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So when somebody has heard this, and let's just for argument's sake say they're like, okay, I get it. Like, it's really delegation is helping. It's not so much the chemicals itself. That really helps somebody, because then that automatically makes the drug seem less important, which really, really helps. Now, so the second point I always go into then is the conflict. And the way I usually start this teaching point is by saying that, there are millions of people out there who take a medication and sleep just fine. And there are millions of people who don't take a sleep medication and sleep just fine. And sort of just de-emphasizing again the importance of the medication, because if it seems like a crucial thing to get right, then it builds up a lot of tension for people. So when people see, okay, both are fine, that can help. But more specifically, where I find people struggling a lot is when they have this inner conflict, when they have a conflict between A, I want to sleep well, and B, I don't want to take any pill. And people often don't want to take any pill because of various reasons, like they don't want to get addicted, and they are worried about health consequences, etc. But then they also want to sleep well. And so when these two interests are sort of in conflict, it leads people to a place where they really don't want to take the medication, but they feel like they have to sleep, and there's the inner friction. There's kind of like the back and forth and the questioning and all this stuff. So I always teach people that this conflict can be resolved in 2 ways. And one way is that you no longer take the medication, because then there's nothing to be conflicted about. But the other way this conflict can be resolved is that you can also change the way you treat yourself and look at taking the medication. For example, a lot of people take vitamins at night, and a lot of us, may not be 100% convinced that the vitamins are having a huge impact on our health. We may take a vitamin because, maybe it'll help, maybe not. And more importantly, I ask people, how do you treat yourself for taking a vitamin? And most people will actually say, I feel really good about it. I kind of congratulate myself. I feel good about taking it. And when I then say, well, if you think about the sleeping pills you're taking, and let's say it's something that is FDA approved, that's safe, and if you're taking it, if you're thinking it as just a little act of self-care, you're not really sure it does that much, but you're not blaming yourself for it, you're not criticizing yourself for it, that can ease that conflict too. And you can be in a place where you're just like, for now I'm going to take it, and there will be a time for me when it's time to taper off. So the second teaching point is that conflict can really hurt people, and that when the conflict is resolved, either by stopping taking it or just being kinder and gentler with ourselves as we're taking it, that really, really helps.
Yeah, I love that one. No point kind of beating yourself up before you're ready to come off. And it's, yeah, okay. And did you have a third point, or was there? Yeah.
Yeah, I have the third one. So when somebody, let's say, just again for argument's sake, somebody says okay, I understand delegation, and let's say they heard the second point about conflict, and they say, I understand the conflict part, but I think I'm ready. I think I do want to come off whatever I'm taking. And then people often ask me, so exactly what's the best way to do that? How many milligrams should I go down, and what time frame, etc. And of course, then I say this is not medical advice, so talk to your prescriber about this. But in what I think is that often it is thinking that there is an ideal way, a perfect way to come off that doesn't make us anxious is tricky, because we're again trying to forecast our own emotions and our own emotional response, versus making a plan and sticking to it. So I call this mapasti, make a plan and stick to it. And what I think matters when it comes to this plan is that it feels doable to you, that it doesn't feel like shocking or like, super fast taper, but it feels like, I think I can do this, I'm going to go down by such and such amount in such and such time. That feels okay to me. Then I say, okay, this is your plan, and stick to it. Make a plan and stick to it. And because it's often the second guessing that creates trouble for us. So that's the mapasti. But of course, when somebody then is like telling me, hey, Daniel, I was doing so well, but yesterday I was so anxious, so frazzled that I took the medication again. I took the full dose, and now I've undone all my progress. I'm back to square one. Then I'm like, not at all. Not at all. Like, we all do things like that when we're just frazzled, right? And I say, the second acronym, this WIDIF, like, make a plan and stick to it. But when you don't, it's fine. When you don't, it's fine.
Yeah. I love that. That's well, I mean, it's all about, what I'm hearing is about being kind to yourself, not creating additional anxiety, coming at yourself with a much more compassionate perspective. And that also facilitates, the recovery from insomnia. That's great. I want to segue again, because there's so much I want to cover with you. A lot of people that will be listening to this show will have a condition called protracted withdrawal injury. Essentially, it's I'd say can be a fairly severe neurological pain, neuropathic pain. What's your experience been like helping people with insomnia who are, who have chronic and severe pain?
Yeah, that's a nice question. I would say that, to me, when this question comes up, what really, really helps is to understand the difference between sleep disruption and insomnia. And what I mean by that, well, sleep disruption is kind of an expected impact on sleep that can come from like an innumerable amount of sources. So, for example, pain. If you take any random person and you make them have pain, like let's say I fell with my bike a couple of years ago and I had this like rib pain for like weeks and I did not sleep well. And so it just shows that anyone with pain will have some impact on their sleep. That's called sleep disruption. And it's not only pain, of course. It can be like, your noisy neighbor or stress or, a new medication, or a lot of things can cause sleep disruption. Now, what characterizes sleep disruption is that there's no pondering or wondering around it. We go like, well, of course I'm not sleeping well because this happened, right? So that's sleep disruption. Insomnia, on the other hand, it has this element of mystery around it. We're chasing sleep. We're trying to understand why we're not sleeping. It doesn't make sense to us. We're like, we're internally problem solving. And when somebody has chronic pain, I think what helps to understand is that, anybody with pain will have some sleep disruption. And that leads us to kind of like some level of acceptance. Like, yes, anyone with this pain would have some trouble sleeping. But if we still apply the insomnia teachings here, we see that we don't need to like chase sleep. Like, the more we try to do to achieve sleep, even when we have pain, the more that will just exacerbate things. We will have not only sleep disruption, which is normal and expected, but then we'll have insomnia too. We'll have this fear of sleep that's making it even harder for us to sleep. So essentially where this leads us is to a place where if you have chronic sleep and insomnia, you can do this like education, this inner work, learn about acceptance and self-kindness, etc., which removes the insomnia, right? So we're no longer having any trouble sleeping from the fear of not sleeping. That's gone. Will we sleep, perfectly well? Maybe not. As long as we have pain, there may be some sleep disruption. But what often causes much more suffering than sleep disruption, it is the insomnia, because insomnia is like an emotional struggle, and when that's gone, things are much, much easier.
So it sounds essentially well, I hope I heard you right. What I heard is apply the same teachings of, I guess, self-compassion, try to not make it a bigger deal than it is. And in many ways, that kind of fits with this condition because protracted withdrawal has a good prognosis. It recovers gradually. Sometimes it can take a couple of years, but it always trends in a positive direction. And there's people who have made it through it with really poor sleep and they still come out the other side and they're okay. So probably addressing a lot of the concerns that you will be okay even, with sleep or without sleep helps people stay calm while they're going through it.
100%. And by the way, like one thing I really want to add here is that for some people in your audience, I think when they hear you say you'll be okay even if you sleep little or more, they'll be like, how can you say that? That's not true. Because they'll say, when I don't sleep, I feel like completely like, I feel like a wreck. I feel like I can't concentrate. I'm tired. I have physical symptoms, et cetera, et cetera.
My day is ruined. The next day is ruined. Yeah.
Exactly. And I just want to quickly comment on that, which is that when we have that idea, of course, we will really desire and crave sleep, right? Because we are so afraid of how we'll feel the next day. So it can really, really help to understand why is the next day like that. And I like to do this thought experiment. So if you take a random person, never had any sleep struggles, no relationship to sleep, if you will, and you keep that person awake for a whole 24 hours. They're up all night, right? We keep them awake all night. And then we ask that person, how do you feel today? In all likelihood, that person will say, I feel a bit tired today. I'm sleepy. I'm a little foggy, a little difficulty concentrating, which shows that, of course, sleeping less in itself, without our own reaction to it, has some impact. And so that is true. But what I think really, really helps, again, is to see what this person does not say. So a random person that we kept up 24 hours will not say, I have a tsunami of anxiety. I don't know how I'm going to function. Doom and gloom. I think my world is coming down on me, And that just shows us that what really bothers us when we have insomnia is not actually how much we slept, but how we react to how much we slept. The emotional reaction to sleeping less and how we think about it. And when people see that, that can be so eye-opening because that takes them from like, oh, I have to sleep or I'm going to feel terrible to, oh, it's not how much I sleep that makes me feel a certain way. It's more how I think about it. And so, yeah, that can really, really change things.
What do you tell people to help them, I guess, break out of that, this day is ruined? Well, I know in your book, this is a leading question. You talk about like maybe going to the spa and, doing things on these bad days. Like how do you coach people to get the most out of these kind of bad days so they can kind of learn in real time by like kind of throwing themselves into a bad day to kind of see that it's not that bad? Like, what do you do with your clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. One thing that I think is really helpful in our kind of community is that we have a lot of, like on our YouTube channel, we have a lot of stories. Like a lot of people share their stories of how they left the struggle, and hearing that other people had the same ideas. And, when the ideas change, everything change can be really, really powerful and helpful. So I often direct people to listen to some of the success stories. But other than that, I want to say that for a lot of us, we can actually find evidence that not everything hinges on sleep, but just by looking at our own memories and our own experiences. I may ask somebody to be like, hey, do you ever remember a day in your life that was actually really nice, even though you hadn't slept much? And some people are like, yeah, when I got married, that was the best day of my life, but I hardly slept the day before. Like that can be like nice evidence. Or the opposite. Some people remember like, I had a really crappy day, 2 days ago and actually slept the whole night. And both those can just like be evidence that shows that, how much we sleep isn't really what matters. So just looking back, like that can be really helpful. And you're also right. I write a lot about, taking advantage of a kind of a choppy night where we in the morning we don't feel well, we're like tired and anxious, etc., and be like, you know what, this happened. I didn't have a nice night, but I can just kind of be kind to myself, be nice do something extra special for myself, and that can really be helpful because when the brain sees that something nice can happen even if we didn't sleep less, then that pressure to sleep can come down. So yeah, that can be really helpful.
A lot of these things are really, the analogy I think of with what I deal with is protracted withdrawal injury, where, people, it has a nonlinear course of recovery. So, they have this neuropathic pain syndrome, and then it will kind of come and go, where some days will be fine and other days will be really bad. And the main thing that I think helps people get through this is distraction. And so when people have the bad days, I tend to try and get them as active in their life as possible, so they're not kind of in the house thinking about how bad the pain is. And also having those experiences, just like you said, where, it was an awful day. I didn't feel like going out to lunch with my family, but you know what? When I was there, that was like 90 minutes where I actually forgot about how bad my pain was. And and I think people need to see that, to kind of snap out of that cycle of I can't do anything, and to learn, actually, engaging in life to the extent that I can actually be very therapeutic and can make the days go faster.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's like you said, like understanding that cognitively can be helpful, but it's often when people actually experience it and get kind of like experiential learning and like, you know what, that it happened. I went out to that lunch with my family and I felt at ease, or I didn't feel the pain much. Just experiencing that can be so helpful.
Yeah. So Coach Daniel, I'm kind of out of questions at the moment, so I want to invite you to just kind of jump in with anything that we haven't discussed, which you think is really cool or neat, or that we've left out that you really want to share.
That's I'm kind of going in my mind, like, what if I could choose one thing, what would I pick? Well, I probably will just share one little thing that I think we didn't cover to that great extent, and it is the following. So one thing that makes a lot of people in our community really frazzled and scared is that they've heard that, if you don't sleep enough, you are going to get like Alzheimer's or immune deficiency, or it's going to cause havoc in your body. And the strange thing is that when you actually look at evidence, there is no evidence that shows that short sleeper insomnia causes any of that. There's just no studies showing that. So what we always hear about are just associations. Somebody does like this study where they take like 1,000 people and say, how are you sleeping? And, do you have diabetes? And they're like, oh, look, there's a correlation between the two. And then they're like, not sleeping enough causes this and that. But in reality, it's quite easy to see how that can happen. If we imagine anybody who has any health issue, that is very likely to impact their sleep. Like, if somebody has, arthritis or pain or, any health issue is likely to impact our sleep. And we know that because because of sleep disruption, but it's not causational. So, we could talk a lot about this, but what I just want to share real briefly is that if you actually look at the evidence, there's no evidence that short sleeper insomnia causes any health issues, and that can be a huge source of relief, and that can really help.
Yeah. Well, Coach Daniel, I want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come and speak with my audience. For those of y'all who want to learn more about Coach Daniel, I'd highly recommend Set It and Forget It. It's kind of a detailed version of this talk. And also go and check him out on his YouTube channel. Can you plug your YouTube channel, Daniel? What do people search to find it?
Absolutely. They just search The Sleep Coach School and they'll find it.
Okay, great. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Anytime. Super fun.